At age 3, all I ever wanted to do in life was to become one of the Teletubbies. Living that fun, comfortable life in those cozy suits and having a TV of your own that's like literally attached to your belly. And so, in order to model after them, there would be times where I would speak in the same gibberish like they did. And it got to such an addictive extent that at one point, I remember my mother literally had to intervene by switching off the TV right when I was watching a very important episode. And I didn't really have a lot of options back then, so I was kind of forced to watch cooking shows instead. But fortunately enough, my obsession with those shows grew to a degree wherein I started having presenters of these shows as my role models. Because after all, how nice would life be when you could eat all you want and you can rave about that for a living, right? Just to earn some cash. But I realized that life is not all about just food, and if I were to realize some of these dreams someday, I'll have to make an effort for that. And paying attention in school seemed like a great way to start. And so at age 6, I started having these driving thoughts about what career path should I choose. I know it's a bit odd. I'm just 6 years old, and here I'm figuring out the complexities of adulthood. But this partly had to do with the people around me encouraging me that since I was a twin of my aunt, it's kind of evident, we kind of look alike, that perhaps I wouldn't do so bad if I modeled after her and pursued a PhD as well as getting a medal in engineering. Sounds easy when I just speak this out, right? Well, nope. I didn't realize how difficult would that be until I discovered a slew of ginormous engineering textbooks at our place and realizing that a PhD literally takes 6 years to finish. Imagine the number of things you could do in 6 years instead of just one doctoral degree. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the last time I ever thought about pursuing a career in engineering. Fast forward to a couple of years later, I found myself in a bit of a rebellious phase. Well, rebellious in the mind of a 10-year-old, that is, wherein I started befriending my teenage cousins. Well, I tried, by subscribing to their music tastes and by watching Disney sitcoms, especially Hannah Montana. Now, naturally, I grew to fall in love with that show, so much so that I started manifesting myself as the main character herself and thinking about the supposed thrills of middle school and how life would be like when you got the best of both worlds. And then middle school actually came around, and then I realized that not everything about here is fun and games. But that reality check was totally worth it. Around that same time, I started to get into watching YouTube videos, particularly vlogs. And not a lot of people inspired me as much back then, unlike this guy called Logan Paul. The fact that this man decided to do antiques and stunts just to emphasize the message of being a maverick sounded odd. But funnily enough, it resonated clearly with all of his fans, including me. But sadly, after this particular meet and greet, he got embroiled into this massive, massive scandal, and that was an inflection point for a lot of his fans. Particularly for me, this was a fairly big one. I finally realized that after having several years of several role models, all of whom I had a very short-term saturation with, I figured that perhaps it would be better off if I didn't have one. And hence, I started developing a very dismissive attitude towards this entire concept. And so I feel like the question of whether you have a role model is something that we have come across at some point in our lives, right? You know, our teachers usually share these riveting stories of people who have made it in life, and they always tell us to take inspiration from them every time you do something. And that's where I feel like you start developing these feelings of ideation towards someone. And so, spooked by the fact that this young, bright 13-year-old didn't have anyone else to look up to, unlike most kids, people naturally got alarmed. But I would try to calm them down by saying that my reason was fairly rational. Or at least that's what I thought back then. My perception back then, or what I now believe is society's general perception to this, is that if you were to have someone as a role model, not only would you have to admire their work, but you would also have to subscribe to their beliefs, and you get to be influenced to take whatever life choices that they make, which oftentimes may not be the most wisest and the most moral thing to do. Basically, a situation where a lion no longer finds joy in being a predator, and then one day figures that, you know what, I might as well spend my rest of a life like a cow, just munching grass all day. Now that's what I would call life. The intention may seem heartfelt, but they never think it through. And that's what makes me feel odd when people have definite answers to these questions, when they cite famous people, fictional characters, those people in suits and capes, friends, family, and teachers as their greatest role models. Like, imagine if I just ran up to one of you right now and proclaimed that you're my role model. Chances are you will be perplexed and perhaps a little bit flustered, right? And then this bewilderment develops onto anxiety and this compulsion towards perfecting yourself, because now you're aware that you have the responsibility of being someone's role model. And we're not supposed to be feeling this emotion of anxiety. We're supposed to feel gratified about the fact that we managed to make a difference in someone else's life. But since this very term of a role model has heavy implications, wherein people have been conditioned since time immemorial to believe that a role model is someone who is that archetypical encapsulation of a perfect poster boy or girl, naturally, all of us will have apprehensions whether we can do justice being one. And because of this fear, we begin to perfect ourselves in terms of approach and be so overly mindful of the nitty-gritties that we do. We realize eventually that being idealistically flawless isn't bound to be all sunshines and rainbows. Sure, it may look like that on the outside, but on the inside, it means you're limiting yourself to grow. You're limiting yourself to reinvent things that are supposed to be integral if you want to inspire the people around you. And growth stems from learning curves, and learning curves stem from imperfections. And so, doesn't that mean that you're not a role model? I sense a little contradiction right there. And since I had this realization 2 years ago, I understood that the perception that I had back then wasn't an ideal one, let alone a pragmatic one. The reality is that if you were to consider someone as your role model, it's still contradicting the definition. Because let's face it, as a human race where anyone and everyone has their own set of flaws, none of us can qualify into that bracket. But the bright side of being such an imperfect race is that it gives room for all of these meaningful learning curves. Everyone undergoes a learning curve because of the imperfect things they've done, right? But if you're someone who's under the belief that the world around you can change for the better if they don't follow the same mistakes that you did, you can't just keep that to yourself as though it's your deepest, darkest secret. You're supposed to open up about it, at least at some point in life. And that's what I strongly believe should be in place of a role model behavior. So, in a world which gains hope from good influences around us, I find it heavily dehumanizing that we are carrying out idealistically expectations through labels like these. And I feel like the first point of solution where we should start from is by redefining through an imagination that humanizes these good influences. An imagination that recognizes that yes, we're all human and nobody's perfect. We need to realize that it's okay if you don't have a celebrity, a superhero, a parent, or even a teacher to call an inspiration. It could be this former child laborer who decided to overturn the lives of 20 such child laborers for the better by providing them a school education. It could be this coach who thought that the one way slum children can beat addiction and a bad future could be through football. It could be this economist from the University of Chicago who figured that by investing just $500 into therapy and by providing some cash, you could help out the most troubled young men in West Africa reduce their crime and violence by half. It could be this 12-year-old Canadian boy who decided to fly all the way to Poland to give away 440 backpacks filled with toiletries, toys, candy, and school supplies for those innocent children ravaged by the war in Ukraine. Or it could be the street artist from Italy who fights bigotry by making graffitis of food over graffitis of racist symbols. So, isn't it high time that we finally give the limelight to these indomitable forces of inspiration and celebrate the beauty of goodness in people? So, if there's something that I want to leave you guys today with, it'll be that growth is not about finding the good people to look up to, but it's about finding the goodness in people to look forward to. And P.S., don't be that little yellow duckling. Thank you very much.